Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and I'm joined today by my good friend Daniel Kelly. For those of you who do not know who Daniel is, you can find him on Instagram. You can find him all over social media. You can find him on Twitter. And Daniel is a guy I wanted to get in on my channel today because Daniel has a specific skill set that overlaps really, really well with the content that I like to put out here on the internet, the stuff I like to teach you guys. And that is the area of male optimization, I'd like to say. Would you say that's a fair, an accurate title to give you, Daniel? Male optimizer.
What's up, Sterling? What's up, guys? Glad to be here. So, yeah, male optimization, biohacking, men's health, it all comes under that umbrella, I'd say.
Excellent. And for those guys who aren't familiar with you, can you maybe give them like a background of sort of how you got into this space, how you discovered all this field of biohacking, how you got into it, how you learned all these things that you've learned now, and I guess a little bit about your journey of discovery in learning how to optimize the male body and male hormones and things.
Absolutely. So I guess ever since a young age, ever since like 11, 12, I've always been into health and fitness and wellness. And after I finished university, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I got into investment banking, as you do. And I thought it was like a good career path to go down because it was well paid, it was prestigious. And I just thought it was like the right thing to do with my mindset at that time. But in the back of my mind, I was always like into like health and optimizing and biohacking. And while I was working in investment banking, I was always like experimenting and trying different diets, different training methods, all sorts of things, like to perform at the highest level, right? So when I was working at Goldman Sachs, I would probably work like anywhere from 14, 16, 18-hour days, right? And I knew that if I wasn't in good shape physically, mentally, spiritually, then I simply wouldn't be able to perform at like the high level that's demanded there, because at places like Goldman Sachs, they cut the bottom 1% every year, right? So these guys are ruthless. So I knew that if I wanted to perform well there and not be cut and be in the bottom 1%, it's a very competitive environment that I had to like be on the edge all the time. And through the course of this, my 20s, my early 20s, I'm in my mid 30s now, I was doing all of these experiments and stuff, and I came across like biohacking and blood testing and supplementation. I really dove into it because I found it really fascinating and interesting. It's like, how can I get the absolute most out of my body and my mind by these supplements, these hacks that other people probably didn't know about, right? Like these corners of the internet that you don't know about, and then you go down these rabbit holes. We've all been down them on YouTube, and probably that's how people come across you on the internet, right? And I came across like things like testosterone optimization. It absolutely fascinated me about hormones and how I could improve, because hormones for a man is like your essence of a man. It literally what separates a man from a woman is your testosterone levels at birth, right? And so I thought, well, if testosterone is the most important essence and the most important facet of being a man, how can I optimize my testosterone as much as possible? So I went down the route of what supplements I can use, testosterone boosters, all these type of things. And as a result, I got regular blood tests. And as a result of doing a routine blood test one day when I was 26, 27 years old, I discovered that I had the testosterone level of an 80-year-old man. And so I was pretty shocked, because I was a young man at the time. And I was like, how is it possible that I have T levels so low? And then it suddenly dawned on me why I was feeling the way that I was, because I kind of minimized all of these symptoms that I was experiencing. And after I got that blood test, I kind of had a eureka moment. And I realized, like, over the past year, I'd been suffering with anxiety, mood swings, low libido, lack of performance in the gym, training really hard, but not really gaining any muscle mass or being able to make any progress whatsoever. And I felt like I was like, had a black cloud follow me around all day long. And then once I had found out what my testosterone levels were, I kind of I put two and two together, and it clicked that this is why I felt the way that I did. And I thought that the reason why I felt the way that I did was because my mindset wasn't good. I was negative. I wasn't very positive. I needed all these things that I needed to fix, when in reality it was my hormones were imbalanced. And so once I had this test, it was kind of like my life changed dramatically. And I thought at the time that once my testosterone levels were that low, I thought, well, I didn't think there's anything else that I could do, because I wasn't really drinking. I didn't take any drugs, didn't smoke cigarettes. I'd pretty much at that time, I'd kind of squashed all my bad negative habits. And so that I thought the only thing available to me to have the kind of life that I want and the testosterone levels that I'd like was to go on testosterone replacement therapy, because I was living a clean lifestyle, right? And so I did a lot of research, and one of my close friends and mentors, a guy called Jay Campbell, who's written a book called The Testosterone Optimization Bible, and Stirling may know of him. He mentored me, and he was like instrumental in my journey. And he said that, well, like the only thing left for you to do, bro, is like go on TRT. I thought, well, that's the only thing left for me. And so after a long soul search and deliberation, I decided to go on TRT, and it really transformed my life and helped me in many, many ways, and like improved like the way that I feel and the way that I looked and many things. But what I discovered after being on TRT for a short amount of time, maybe 6 or 12 months, is that it wasn't the magic pill or the fix that I hoped it would be. And in fact, a lot of the things that I was experiencing, such as depression, maybe mood swings, anxiety and stuff like that, those things were still in the background, and TRT hadn't fixed them. And the problem was that I was now on a lifelong medication that I didn't need to be on, right? And so after that, long story short, I quit my job at Goldman Sachs and went to work for a TRT clinic. And this changed my viewpoint even more, because I saw these guys going, I was reading blood work all the time, and I was seeing these guys go on TRT prescribed by a doctor. And I found that a lot of these guys, they didn't need to go on TRT. And actually what they needed to do was to change their lifestyle, something we can get into today, but things like basic things like sleep, nutrition, all of these things, and look after themselves. And what they found out was on their blood test, their T was low. And so they thought, well, I need to go on TRT, right? But in reality, they need to take more action on their lifestyle and change that, as opposed to going on a lifelong medication. And so fast forward to today, after going on TRT myself and working in a TRT clinic and seeing all these guys go on TRT unnecessarily, I decided to start my own men's health optimization coaching business, helping guys like optimize their health through natural, holistic means. And so that's where I am today.
Damn. And that's that batch of symptoms you just described, right? Where like you're feeling lethargic, maybe a little bit depressed, mood swings, like low energy, trouble sleeping, lack of motivation. These are all these symptoms, right? Obviously, there are symptoms of low testosterone levels. I think that is like a kind of like the real pandemic that men face nowadays. Is that you ask, if you were to say that to damn near any man, like 99% of men in their 30s today, they would nod their head in agreement and be like, dude, that's like, that describes me. Like that, I'm having the same problems. Once they get over like their late 20s, like 28, 20, once they pass that and they get into their 30s, I think that's a super, super common like problem for men. And that idea of what you said, where your T levels were that of an 80-year-old man, that is so common now. I think I can't remember where I read this, but it was the average testosterone levels for like men have been declining year on year for the last 50 years. And now the average T levels for a man in like his 30s or something was the average testosterone levels for like a 60-year-old guy in 1950. It's crazy how much the average testosterone in men has plummeted. And do you I know that I have some insight into why that is, but I'd love to hear anything that you've discovered as to why men across the board, like not just in like the US, not just in the West, but like worldwide, are seeing this massive, consistent decline in testosterone levels. Do you have any insight as to why that is?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think if you look at pictures of people from even just 100 years ago, they're quite vibrant, they're energetic. Most of the people, you look at the pictures, although those films that you see from people in the early 1900s, most of them are slender. And so obesity, I think, plays a major, major part. And based on the research that I've looked at, there was a study done in, I think it was 1986, and they did a follow-up of over 1,000 men, quite a lot of men, American study. And they did a follow-up of men over 20 years, and they discovered their testosterone levels declined. That testosterone levels declined significantly just over the course of 20 years in the same men. And what they did is that they said it was age independent. So it wasn't based on their age. And that's a common misconception, is that men think that their testosterone levels decline with age, and it's not necessarily the case. Because if you have to look at people in the Amazon rainforest, for example, all these tribes in Papua New Guinea, you look at pictures of these guys who are older, the guys in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they look like virile, vibrant, and energetic, and they're ripped, right? So that tells you alone that it's not just based on age, because these guys are obviously living the perfect Paleolithic lifestyle, right? They're probably eating raw fish and all that kind of stuff, and they're living a good lifestyle. And obviously you and I can't live that lifestyle because we're part of modern life. We're not going to go live in the jungle, the Amazon rainforest, and hunt for alligators, right? But that demonstrates, just that alone, is that anecdotally looking at these guys, that there's obviously more to it. And there's research has consistently demonstrated that it's not an age, it's not a declining age, because in your 30s, for example, it's not even old, right? So you shouldn't have such a massive drop off and decline in your well-being and your vibrancy as a man in your 30s. Like, you're in the prime of your life. You're in prime. There's nothing that you can't do in your 30s that you can do in your 20s, right? There's nothing that you can't do. So there's obviously more to it than that. And the researchers concluded that it must be something that's not age related, and it's lifestyle or environmental related. And so I mentioned obesity as one of them, but obviously there's lots of guys, myself included, when I went through this, that aren't obese but have these symptoms as well. And so the things that you can think of very, very simply is that, one is that the quality of the food that we eat is terrible. It's nutrient deficient. So even if you eat like a quote unquote good diet, or even if it's organic, let's say, the food doesn't resemble what our grandparents ate or our great grandparents ate 50, 60, 70 years ago, because it's the way it's grown and the way it's cultivated, the nutrients in the soil, it just doesn't have things. So for example, something like zinc, which is so important to men's health, it's responsible for over like 100 chemical reactions in the body. A lot of food doesn't have things like zinc in it, doesn't have magnesium, doesn't have basic minerals that your body needs, the building blocks of things like testosterone and other hormones in the body, which we'll get into later, I'm sure. But things like the diet, sleep is obviously a very, very important one to hormonal function and testosterone. Sleep, people's quality of sleep these days is terrible, simply because of technology and being glued to your blue screens and stuff like that. So your quality of sleep is not very good. You might get 8 hours of sleep a night, but most guys that I speak to, the quality of sleep is terrible. And so sleep, stress, modern living, like, our bodies are not designed to live modern life, right? With all the stresses that it entails. So like kids, mortgage, finances, all of these things. You could argue that our ancestors probably didn't have the same stresses. They just probably had to wake up and their life was quite simple. Stressful, obviously. I'm not going to say that it wasn't. And I wasn't living at that time, but they probably had one goal, which is to go out and hunt and then go back, and then they could rest in the evening, right? And so our life has a lot more complexity involved. And so managing all the complexity and navigating it is obviously a stressful thing. And I think that as men as well, we absorb all of this stress and we don't realize how much of an impact it has on our biochemistry. The stress is a major one in terms of hormonal function. And then the other thing I would say is that all of those symptoms that you talk about, they are indicative of like kind of low testosterone. If you had a blood test, it might say that you have low testosterone. But the thing is, low testosterone itself is kind of a symptom of a larger problem. And what I mean by that is that if your body is beat down from eating crap, not sleeping well, super stressed, and all of these things, then the last thing it wants to do is create testosterone or produce testosterone. Therefore, I would say that low testosterone is just a symptom of a wider problem with your body or the environment that you live in. And then the final thing I would say is, and this is probably the biggest thing, is the toxins in the environment. So I've done a lot of tests and I've seen guys that have, like every single guy that I've tested or worked with, that without a shadow of a doubt has got like some form of toxicity in their body. You can't escape it living in modern life. So whether that's heavy metal toxicity, whether that's environmental toxins from plastics that have gotten into your body, or things like mold, very common. Like all of these things can kind of affect your hormonal production and the way that your body's supposed to function. So if we combine all of these things in unison, like that has a major impact on men's health.
That's interesting you mentioned mold there, because I actually did a mold tox when I like. So long story short, several years ago I was living in Los Angeles and I was living in an old house in LA, and so I knew something was off. I wasn't like, my energy levels were low. I wasn't quite feeling as vibrant as I used to. And then I moved house, and out of curiosity, I did like a toxicity exposure test, like a blood test. No, it was like a bunch of different things I tested. But one of the things that I came back for was black mold exposure. And no shit, I got the test results, and then maybe like a month later, I got an email from our old landlord saying, "Hey, we just been renovating the house and we found like black mold in the house." I was like, "Aha! This explains a lot." And that is a lot more common than people think, especially if you're living in a house that isn't brand new, and if you're living in a place that has a bit of humidity around it. It's not like a super dry, arid environment. You should absolutely be testing for black mold exposure, because that can lead to a ton of problems like brain fog, like slowing you down a lot, sleep problems, concentration problems, focus, like motivation problems. Yeah, black mold exposure is a son of a bitch.
100%. And guys then attribute it, they have all these symptoms, they attribute it to their age, or I must have low T or something like that. And then it's almost like they victimize themselves a little bit. But what they don't realize is that there's other things at play that might be doing that. And it sounds kind of complex, guys, and to a degree it is. But sometimes if you think a little bit outside the box, like what Stirling's saying here, is like there's a bit more to it than that. And so I would say it's not just your age is the reason why you feel like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good frame of reference to give these guys, is that don't use your age as like a scapegoat. And you shouldn't think that this is just it's inevitable. Like, of course I'm gonna like lose energy like this because I'm getting old. And like you said, there's plenty of examples, not just in the modern world, but in the ancient world, like not so modern civilizations, of dudes in their like 60s, jacked, going out and literally hunting every day, crushing it, being virile men, and they're old dudes. And it's like, okay, well, how come that guy can live optimally, but me, with all the modern technology and modern innovations that are available to me, how come I'm not living optimally? And there's something there. And you mentioned before, like the diets that people might have been eating, say 70 years ago, were far more nutrient dense than what we're having. Say maybe our parents or our grandparents' generation, they were eating a lot better with what they had access to. And I think a large part of that is that they were a lot more local to the food they ate. I know, for example, my dad and all of his siblings, they literally like milked the cow in the morning. I mean, they were raised on a farm, but his job before he went to school every morning, he'd wake up, he'd go milk the cow, and that milk was put on his cereal that morning. Everything was very, very locally sourced. It wasn't like any fruit they got came from the town they were living in. It didn't come from Argentina or something like that. It wasn't sent across the world and mass produced. It was all locally sourced. And I think there's a large degree of care that goes into the soil and the land, and thus produces better crops and far more nutrient dense food when it is grown locally and consumed locally. Because as the farmer and as the consumer, there's like an intimate connection with, okay, like I'm literally growing this so that Daniel can have it, and I know Daniel, so I'm going to take care of this food, and I'm going to take care of the soil. I'm going to make sure it's like as optimal as it could possibly be. I'm not going to take a shortcut, and I'm not going to buy some. Well, maybe then they weren't even invented, but use like what do they use on like things like Roundup, or like things that can try to increase the yields of crops these days, but at the detriment, specifically the long-term detriment of the soil that it's being grown in. It's like short-term gains versus long-term.
Well, not only the soil, but that's something that's very, very common actually, is pesticides and herbicides, and they're really, really damaging to the human body actually. And so if you do some research into some of these pesticides and herbicides that are used, some of them are really nasty. And so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you see a lot of people that have these, they end up having them in their body, and they don't spend any time near a farm, and yet their body is full of these things, and it's predominantly down to the foods that you eat. And it's an interesting topic in itself, and we could probably do a whole podcast on that. And it's like, to a degree, we're almost victims of our own success, right? Because our society has been so systematized, and the supply chains have been so refined and improved over the last 50 to 100 years that we're kind of cut off. We're disconnected from the source of the food, whereas our ancestors were very, very close to it, as you said. So the nature of modern living is a lot more complex than our ancestors used to have. And so people watching this might think, oh my God, like there's so much things I have to do to be successful, to be a man, and to thrive, and to really be vibrant in today's world. And the truth is, you have to. That's your burden of performance, I guess, as a man, is that you have to kind of do all things. You have to optimize your health. You have to like eat well. You have to take care of your body. And probably our ancestors didn't have to try as hard as we do. But if you want to, guys, then ultimately you have to do those things. And I think, and Andrew Tate says it a lot, and you've spoken about this a lot at depth in your own podcast. And I think the other thing to mention there, based on what you said, is that a lot of guys, they normalize feeling like this way because everyone else of their age is in the same position. So if everyone else around you, let's say you're a guy in your 30s or 40s, and everyone else you see around you is kind of like weak and out of shape, and they feel like crap. And, oh my God, I just feel so bad. You think that that's normal, but just because everyone else experiences it doesn't mean it's normal. Doesn't mean you should feel that way.
No, absolutely not. And it's you touched on this earlier, and I'm glad you touched on this. And it was this idea of like, this isn't like a mentality thing. It's not like if because a lot of guys will sort of beat ourselves up and be like, oh, I'm being lazy. I'm just not toughing up enough. I'm not being disciplined enough. And you can mistake these sort of symptoms of, not having an optimized life and thus not having optimized testosterone levels. You can mistake those symptoms, the cause of those symptoms rather, as being like just not being disciplined enough. When in reality, it's actually like, if you had everything, the machine was running smoothly like it should, though, you wouldn't have the problem in the first place. It's not a case of obviously we can all be more disciplined and we can all try harder and we can all be more switched on. But at the same time, that isn't the cause of the problem. It's not your fault that you're not disciplined enough. It's the whole machine that you're working with isn't running as smoothly as it possibly can.
I agree. I think that the default mindset that guys go to, especially with all the conditioning and the programming that we have nowadays, of like the hustling and the for want of a better term, like the David Goggins style. And I don't have anything against that, because I think that discipline is important, right? But the default mindset that guys have is like, I need to be more disciplined. I need to try harder. But like, if that worked, guys, you wouldn't feel the way that you do, right? The discipline is not always the answer, and being restricting yourself even more, it's not always going to be the answer, right? What the answer is really like a lack of understanding of how to optimize probably your health and wellness. It's probably simpler than you think. Is that you don't understand what those levers are that you need to pull to make yourself feel good, right? It's not a case of like restricting your diet even more, waking up at 5 a.m. and having a cold shower. There's a little bit more to it than that, and myself and Stirling can go into it. But I think it's a very simplistic way to look at it, and I think more often than not, it's a kind of a lack of understanding of how to optimize your health, and maybe lack of understanding of how to work on those things that really matter. Because at the end of the day, if your body feels good, like Stirling said, if your body feels good and it's a well-oiled machine, you don't have to try really hard with discipline, because you feel energetic, you feel motivated, you feel good. Obviously you're going to have ups and downs, peaks and valleys. That's part of being human. But you shouldn't have to really like will and grit yourself every day to and force yourself to do things. I would argue that if that's the case, then there's something that's missing. There's not a problem with you as a person. It's something that's missing within your body, because your default state as a human being, you should feel vibrant, you should feel good. So it's not a problem with your mindset. I would say it's something more to it. And let's say maybe it's your diet. Maybe you've got an imbalance that me and Stirling are going to talk about. Maybe there's something off, but I would say it's less to do with you, and it's more to do with like how the machine's functioning as a whole.
And that's really important to say there, because it's well, actually, first of all, there's a quick super chat here, because you just touched really briefly on cold showers, and this guy actually has a question about cold showers. So I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on this. The Lord Panic, thank you for the 15 pounds super chat. It's a pleasure, Stirling. He says, I take cold showers on a daily basis, especially now in winter, but realized it stunts protein synthesis. That's actually something I haven't heard before. Is he fighting an uphill battle, and should he lower his cold shower duration? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So, being honest, great question. But I think what I'll do is to answer this question. I think it's very, very important to understand that. I always counsel guys in this way. It's like, is that a case of low panic? Is that a case of you majoring in the minors a little bit? Are you worrying about the small things that don't really matter, right? So, as opposed to worrying about the cold shower and the effect of the cold shower on protein synthesis, are you taking care of the things that really count towards protein synthesis, which is like, is your sleep good? Are you eating well? Are you hydrating well? Like, guys want to like as men, we have a tendency to we love data, we love analysis, and we love focusing on things, like, because that's the nature of who we are as men. And I think that's cool. But also sometimes, because we drill down so much and we get tunnel vision, we tend to obsess over the small things that don't really matter, and we forget all these things over here that we're not doing. And that actually sometimes I find that we use these as an excuse to not do all of these things over here. So like, I would ask you, is like, as opposed to worrying about the cold shower, if the cold showers work for you and you feel good doing them, do them. Like if it brings a benefit to your life, but also don't discount the other things over here, the basics, which I'm a fan of, mastering the basics. I'm sure Stirling is when it comes to the stuff in his realm, right? Doing the basics right. So like, are you sleeping well? Is your diet good? Like, are you taking care of your body in general? And I would encourage you to focus more on those things as opposed to worrying about the effects of cold showers.
Excellent answer. Going back to what you were talking about before, and that if the machine's running smoothly, you should feel, vibrant. Things shouldn't be as much of an effort. It's not like a case of discipline over things. I think it's important for guys to understand that one of the key roles of testosterone is to make work feel rewarding. Like when you have good testosterone levels, it's like work should feel like pleasure. It's the molecule that makes you want to chase. It makes you want to compete, to achieve, to take on challenges, to go pursue things, to hunt. It's literally what makes us want to hunt. But in today's day and age, that hunt is, maybe it's not necessarily going out and getting a deer. It might be pursuing a woman, or it might be going out and making that sale, or closing that deal, or getting that next job, or whatever it is. That's the hunt that we're on. But either way, it still has the testosterone in your body has the same effect of making that work feel very rewarding and very satisfactory and pleasurable. And when you don't have that, it can make life, like you said, feel like this sort of uphill battle. Feel
Drudgery.
like it makes it feel like a chore.
Yep.
More than anything else.
And that's how I felt actually, like, funnily enough, like when my testosterone was in the gutter. And I always want to emphasize this. I'm not going to focus just on the T levels. It's just that was more symptomatic of the fact that my body was not working the way it should do. And I won't go into the complexities of it, but like basic things like my gut health wasn't where it should have been. In hindsight, looking back, my gut health wasn't where it should have been. My sleep wasn't as good as I thought it was, and all of these things. But my T level was in the gutter, and like sex felt like a chore for me, like absolute chore. Like I didn't want to do it. I didn't feel vibrant as a man. Every day I had to force myself to get out of bed, and every day I had these mood swings. I couldn't really control it, and I just thought, what is the problem? Why am I like this? And all these other people around me, they're all disciplined, and little did I know they're all going through the same problems as well.
Right. Okay, so for the guys watching right now, what are some like actionable takeaways that they can, start applying to make this machine a little bit more smooth, so to actually naturally optimize their testosterone levels? Maybe some of these, you mentioned before, some of these levers that they can be pulling, the things that are actually going to be making the big things that are going to make an impact, rather than focusing on like these little minutia, like, okay, what's the duration of my cold shower? Is it an optimal duration, for example?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'm going to give you a counterintuitive answer, which is different to what most people would give. And the tendency with this sort of stuff when it comes to optimizing your health is to get into this checkbox mode where it's like, okay, am I taking vitamin D? Am I taking zinc? Am I doing all this? I'm taking all this stuff, but nothing's working. And I would say the number one thing that guys should do in order to start feeling better is stop giving yourself a hard time. That's the number one thing. It's like, we don't talk about this as men enough, but as men, we've spoken about this, but we have like the burden of performance. So we have to perform, and no one gives a shit about us if we don't perform, right? So it's up to you to perform. But if you're constantly giving yourself a hard time and constantly beating yourself up about why you don't feel the way that you want to feel, etc., you're not going to feel any better. You're not going to be motivated and driven to want to change that situation, right? So the number one thing that I find that I counsel on is that actually stop being so hard on themselves. Because here's the thing: if you don't devote so much energy to being hard on yourself all the time and beating yourself up over minor transgressions and mistakes, then you have more energy to devote to feeling better and putting that energy into things that you want to do and to making your, because at the end of the day, what is it that you're doing all this stuff for? To optimize your health, if not to feel better. And so if you can't give yourself permission to feel good about yourself now, even though you might not have the ideal physique, you might not be performing in the bedroom the way that you want, if you don't allow yourself to feel good about yourself and give yourself permission to feel okay and not beat yourself up for mistakes, then how are you ever going to feel good? Because trust me, if you still have that mindset after taking testosterone, if you stay taking all the things that we're going to talk about today, and you still beat yourself up, you're not going to feel any better. So it doesn't matter. So I would say that's the number one thing, because as men, we tend to be super, super hard on ourselves and give ourselves a hard time. And we think that's going to motivate us, but it doesn't motivate you, because you're putting all that energy into being hard on yourself when you could devote it positively. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is, like, the most actionable thing, I think, is like, work on one thing at a time because guys have a tendency to like focus on many things and try and optimize all different areas, sleep, hormones, stress, all those kind of things. And I think that I'm a big fan of focusing on one thing at a time, that the thing that's going to move the needle the most. And then once you've done that, focus on the next thing. So for most guys, the thing that's going to move the needle the most, in my experience, is sleep, because the quality of your sleep determines the quality of your waking life, right? And it's such an easy one to fix. It's such an easy one to rectify. And it will it's kind of a domino effect on the rest of your life, because if you sleep, let's say 7 to 8 hours a night of solid sleep, like you feel great the next day, like you feel like a new person. But if you sleep like 4 or 5 hours of broken shit sleep every night, like you're going to feel like terrible every day. And it doesn't matter how much zinc or vitamin D or testosterone booster you take, you're still going to feel like crap. And so with that newfound energy that you get from improving your quality of sleep, therefore you can devote it to like being a bit more disciplined with your diet. And I'll say from a scientific standpoint, for example, there's lots of research to demonstrate the link between things like obesity, low testosterone, and all these things with lack of sleep, right? So sleep deprivation ruins and tanks your testosterone. And also, interestingly, what sleep deprivation does is that it increases your cravings for high caloric, sugar dense foods. So if you ever wonder when you wake up after a bad night's sleep why you're craving all these foods, it's not because you lack discipline. It's not because it's your problem. It's because your body's craving it because you haven't slept enough and because your blood sugar's probably dropped, right? So if you devote that energy to sleep, you'll find that weight loss is easier. You find you have more energy and you have more discipline and willpower to devote to everything else. So I would say sleep is the number one thing when it comes to optimizing your testosterone and health, because it's just a domino effect on everything else, and a very actionable step. We could talk about sleep all day long. We could do a podcast on it, but I would say the number one thing is to stop looking at your phone before you go to bed, because the guys use it as a bit of a crutch to help them fall asleep and distract their mind. But what it does is it's just messing with your quality of sleep. And without fail, everyone that I've counseled to stop looking at their phone before they go to bed, their sleep quality improves. And then the other thing I would say is, like, again, is a very basic thing, but how many guys watching this, how many of you are actually drinking enough water every day? 70% of your body is made up of water. And you want to like look at all these testosterone boosters, but you're still drinking like 1 cup of water a day, right? So if you haven't mastered the basics, guys, don't try to, like the old adage is, don't try and run before you can walk, right? So I always believe in getting those foundational things right, and then you can move on to the more, the sexy things.
I mean, that's interesting you mentioned the water, because I just did an 8-week boot camp in Marbella with our mutual friend, and like I did my first amateur boxing match. And one of the things that they told us from the very, very start of that 8-week camp was drink like a gallon of water a day, every day for like 8 weeks. And I cannot emphasize enough how much that alone impacted my energy levels, impacted my quality of sleep. It was ridiculous. Like, considering I don't think I've ever drank that much water every day consistently for that length of time before. And it was that one thing, I lost like 3.5 kilos, like effortlessly. Like, my quality of sleep it was weird. Even though like some nights, okay, we'd be out having a late dinner, and then I have to, at 6 a.m. I have to get up and do a strength and conditioning session with our mutual friend T. I felt amazing. Like, we didn't feel like bad sleep, and it was like that I can absolutely testify to that improvement. Like, just drink more goddamn water, guys. And another thing I'll say in regards to improving quality of sleep, I personally have experimented with this a lot, and having like a blacked out room, I find like having nowhere where like artificial light can kind of creep in has always massively improved my quality of sleep. I try to keep the room as black as I possibly can from the so that room I go to sleep, there's not a single crack of light coming in, and so I feel like I'll even though I'm not necessarily waking up to sunlight, when I wake up, the sleep has been kind of uninterrupted. Because I've maybe I'm wrong with this, but I've heard that your body, like even your skin cells, has like light receptors where it can, like, if it gets exposed to light, it can signal your body to start, like that waking up process, and like you can kind of make sure you don't start that too early by just having a completely black room. Do you know anything about that?
I couldn't speak for skin receptors on the skin. That's something that I have to research myself. But it makes total sense, because your exposure to sunlight dictates your circadian rhythm and like how your body clock functions, right? So if you think of how our bodies evolved and how our ancestors lived, they would get up in the morning from sunlight, and then they would be like in bed or like in the cave or whatever by the campfire when the sun goes down, and so they wouldn't have any exposure to light. And so what your circadian rhythm, exposure to sunlight, like kind of modulates your circadian rhythm, and your circadian rhythm is like your sleep-wake cycle, right? So basically dictating what time you go to bed, how quickly you feel tired before you go to sleep, and all of those kind of things. And it also stimulates the release of a hormone called melatonin, which helps you fall asleep at night. And so if you find that you're struggling to fall asleep at night, and it's a real struggle to fall asleep, a lot of the times it can be because your sleep-wake cycle has been disrupted because you probably got too much exposure to artificial light. And sometimes what a really good hack that you can do in the morning is just like get exposure to sunlight first thing in the morning, and that can reset your circadian rhythm and make it a bit more natural as the way it's supposed to be.
I see what you're saying, yeah. And so because the, like you mentioned before, like staying off your phone and stuff, right? That the light that you get from that, or from say like a laptop, like this is like artificial blue light, correct? And that is what
correct
stops your body from going into this melatonin production cycle and getting into sleep a lot easier. That would be accurate?
I would say that's accurate. I would also say the most accurate thing is we can talk about like sleep hygiene is perhaps the most important aspect. Like sleep hygiene, when I say sleep hygiene, is what you do before you go to bed, which dictates how well you sleep. Also, a lot of people, in my experience, is that the mind is the most powerful thing here. The mind is way more powerful than the body. The body is an instrument of the mind. And a lot of people have a story about their sleep or about their health in general, right? And so anyone watching this, it's important for you to identify what is the story that you've been telling yourself about your health. Have you been telling yourself the story about your health, which is that I'm always feeling tired, I always feel like crap, every day's bad, my sleep's terrible, etc., etc. So if you tell yourself a story for long enough, you're going to believe it, right? So I would encourage you to tell yourself a different story. Even if you don't believe it at first, it's important because your mind basically, it doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination, right? So if you continually feed it with a certain story, that's basically what it's going to give you, right? So not only to change these things that Stirling and I have been talking about, like these tactics, the sleep hygiene and blue lights, which are very, very important, by the way, but it's also important to identify what are the mindset blocks that you might have around your sleep. A lot of guys that I speak to have problems with their sleep. They say, oh, I never sleep well. I always sleep, but I always wake up in the night. Well, if you all tell yourself you always wake up in the night, guess what's going to happen, right? So it's important to be aware of these little traps that you have, these mental traps.
I like that. I'm just going to quickly check if we've got any questions in here. That's an interesting question. Yeah, from Mike. How do you know if you're drinking a low amount of water or too much water? Like how do you know if you're drinking enough water, basically?
Well, I would always err on the side of you're not drinking enough water. Most people just don't drink enough, right? So I wouldn't worry about that as a problem. But like the old adage is that if you can see your pee is clear, right? I don't know if that's really an accurate gauge or not. Some people have an issue when they drink a lot of water. I'm going to the bathroom too much. Well, sorry to say, but that's part of being hydrated. So you just go to the bathroom more often, right? That's just part of being hydrated and drinking a lot of water. But I mean,
when I was drinking doing this boot camp and drinking like a gallon of water a day, like 5 liters of water a day, because I was sweating so much, I actually didn't pee that much. I wasn't constantly going to the bathroom because I was just sweating it out because I was we're doing sprints on the treadmill every day and like this kind of thing, and we're sparring every day. So that for the guys listening to that, it's like if you're drinking a lot of water and you're peeing all the time, well, you might not be sweating enough. You know, you might not be hitting the gym enough because like it's supposed to, you know, that's kind of how you cool down. You evaporate, and that's how your body cools its temperature down. That's what the water's for. You know, it's designed to go through your system one way or another. It's not supposed to sit there. You know, it's supposed to go through you in a certain way. And I think, you know, if you're not sweating enough, maybe that's one reason.
I agree. I mean, there's a rule of thumb that you can have, like there's basic rules, like 2 to 3 liters of water a day is good. But if you live in a warmer climate, for example, if you live in a place like Miami or Texas, you should be drinking more water than the average person, simply because your body's going to sweat it more because you live in a hot environment, right? And how much exercise you do. If you, like, I know guys that like train multiple times a week and they drink like 1 or 2 liters of water a day. That's not enough. Like, because your body's going to be sweating it out, and like I said, your body's 70% water, so you need to be well hydrated just to function. And certainly, I'd love to hear what Stirling thinks about this, but like hydration from a performance standpoint in the bedroom, right? Most of your body is water. Circulation, hydration, these things go hand in hand. So I think that another thing that I read once, and I think this makes sense to me, is like half your body weight in ounces of water is a good one to shoot for. So for example, if you weigh 180 pounds, let's say, half your body weight is 90 ounces in water, and that's a top end. That's a lot for most people, but that's a good kind of rule of thumb to shoot for most people, I would say.
Interesting. I've never heard that before. I've heard something similar to that when it comes to like protein intake, like half your weight in pounds, but in grams, and then that's like
right.
Yeah. That's what I heard before. All right. So to kind of recap for the guys here, like about the key levers they want to pull that are going to move the needle when it comes to optimizing natural testosterone production. We've talked about water intake, making sure you're getting sufficient amount of water. We've talked about optimizing your sleep, making sure you're actually getting quality sleep and not, getting off the phone, getting off the laptop. So actually, that's something we didn't touch on. How many like hours before they sleep are you generally recommending guys like stay the hell away from any like kind of blue light electronics? I think
60 to 90 minutes is good. Like we all live like in the modern world, and sometimes it's difficult to like you have to be on your phone or for whatever reason. But I would say more often than not, you don't have to be. So 60 to 90 minutes before bed, and we can talk about some specific supplements as well. But like the hydration, staying off your phone, and sleep, those are very important, big needle movers in my experience.
And you talked about, you also mentioned, which I think is very important, this mentality of like the story that you tell yourself about your health is important, and giving yourself not being like harsh on yourself and not thinking like I'm not working hard enough, I'm not disciplined enough. Giving yourself permission to change that narrative is giving you more energy to focus on these things that are going to actually move the lever. And maybe you'd like to touch on like a couple of key things they can supplement with. And I know I have an idea of what you're going to recommend, but I'm not going to make any predictions. I'll let you give these guys your take on it before I jump in.
Yeah, so I think I'm freezing. I'm not sure if it's my end or if it's your end. It's frozen a little bit, but I'll do my best here. You said you want me to summarize like about this story or about the supplements?
Yeah, I mean, what supplementation would you recommend guys take on a daily basis to try and increase those testosterone levels? Maybe I stalled again.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you. Tell you what, I'm gonna type it in the private chat that way.
Oh, cool.
You got it. Supplements.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, so supplements to take every day for T levels. I think the number one thing is vitamin D. Vitamin D is actually, it's not a supplement, it's actually a pro-hormone, but that's not really important. But vitamin D, a lot of people that I see have vitamin D deficiency, and vitamin D is a key contributor to hormonal health. And so if you're not getting enough vitamin D, especially if you live in a cold weather climate, somewhere like the UK, Europe, or even the East Coast of America, it's very, very important to supplement with enough vitamin D every day. But it's also important to make sure that you take that with food or with like some kind of fish oil, maybe, because it's a fat soluble vitamin. So a lot of guys, they take vitamins, and I don't want you to obsess about, and I should take this supplement at this time and this, but be aware that things like vitamin D, you should take that usually with food to help it digest and your body absorb it. Because the interesting thing is, like, you can take all the supplements you want, but if your body doesn't absorb them, it doesn't matter, right? So that kind of goes hand in hand with the next supplement that I would recommend, which is omega-3 fish oil. So omega-3 fish oil, and you can get concentrations which have vitamin D with them as well. So that helps with the improvement of vitamin D. And I actually saw this on a blood test of mine where I was deficient in vitamin D, and I had a blood test, I think it was like a month or 6 weeks later, and my vitamin D improved significantly. And I attribute that to taking it with in the cod liver oil or fish oil. So omega-3 is really good from fish oil. I think you can get it from other sources like vegetables as well, but I think that fish oil is the best one. And taking it the spoon, even though it tastes like crap, that's the best form of taking it, because omega-3s reduce inflammation, and it's an essential fatty acid that your body cannot produce naturally, so it has to get it from elsewhere. So it's important that you get that. If you don't eat, especially if you don't eat fish in your diet, taking omega-3s is super, super important. Reduces inflammation, and inflammation is the underlying cause of most chronic diseases, and especially with low testosterone. So taking omega-3s every day, I think that's super, super important in the form of cod liver oil. So vitamin D, omega-3, zinc, and I'm sure Stirling will agree with this one. Zinc is, as I said earlier, is responsible for over 100 biological processes, especially for sperm and testosterone production. So you should be taking that on a daily basis. And I think to go along with what we spoke about before, magnesium. Magnesium is a deficiency is very, very common as well. You certainly don't get enough of it in our food these days. And what magnesium does is it relaxes the muscles. Calcium contracts it, magnesium relaxes it. And so taking magnesium, especially before bedtime, is one of those ones you can help to relax and feel in a more relaxed state before you go to sleep, and therefore it should help with sleep. So for me, those are my top four. I'd probably say another one, which is one of my favorites as well, which is creatine monohydrate. Creatine monohydrate, even though it technically doesn't improve testosterone production, it does so many other things from an energetic standpoint. It improves ATP production, which is a form of energy and helps you last longer in the gym. But also it helps with things like immune function and stuff like that. And I think it's so cheap, and it's one of the most researched supplements in the world. I think it's an absolute no-brainer to take as well. And then I'll probably add another one onto that. And my sixth one is one I like, which is called citrulline malate. Citrulline, and Stirling knows about this. Citrulline malate is it helps with nitrous oxide production, NO, which is you can also get from beetroot juice. And what that does is it helps the circulation of blood and blood flow. And so what I find is that not only does it give you a better pump, but it can also help with potentially with things like erection quality and stuff like that. And again, another cheap, easy supplement to take on a daily basis. It's not harmful and it's good for you. So I can't highly recommend those supplements enough.
No, I agree. There's and it's cool to see like the overlap between, okay, you're recommending some of the stuff for testosterone optimization, and I recommend a bunch of the stuff for like sexual enhancement and sexual.
They go hand in hand.
They go totally hand in hand, and for multiple reasons too. Like they not only, like you said, zinc contributes to like several hundred hormonal processes in the body. So it's not only doing like this one thing; it's doing this other thing over here and this other thing over here. And like part of my stack that I used to take before every scene, that I would take the day before every scene, it always included zinc. It always which can actually help to increase your sperm load, shall we say, the next day with your lady friend. Magnesium was always something I used to help. I used to take magnesium before the scene. I'd take it like an hour or two, a couple of hours before I would go to set. And the reason for that is it would act as a muscle relaxant, and a general nervous system relaxant, which allowed me to be calmer, to be more collected, to be more present, so I can be less stressed out, shall we say, when it comes to performing under pressure. And then it also helps, and in addition with citrulline malate, and I would also take L-arginine, but that you could take either, but citrulline malate on its own tends to work better than L-arginine on its own. Can help. What they do is it relaxes the blood vessels. It's a relaxant, a muscle relaxant, but a blood vessel relaxant, which allows more blood flow and increased nitric oxide production, which allows more blood flow, which obviously helps with the old boy downstairs.
It's interesting that you say that, because that's like kind of a pre-workout stack, right? So a lot of these pre-workouts have those in it. But interestingly, when you and I spoke in person about this, you would say you wouldn't, if you want to do that, you wouldn't take caffeine in it, right? Why is it that you wouldn't take caffeine, Sterling?
I mean, I do know guys in my industry who will do like, they'll take a coffee in the morning before they shoot a scene. I think they take it purely for energy levels. I always found, just personally, that caffeine restricted my blood flow, and I got less. I restricted my blood flow, and it made me more susceptible to being nervous and jittery, which is the opposite of this is not the mental state I want to be in if I'm trying to perform under pressure with people watching and cameras and lights and things like that. So for me, and maybe not everyone has this response with caffeine, but for me, caffeine is like this sort of it gets me in this like alert, excited, slightly jittery kind of that's like mental and physical space. And the opposite of that is like with magnesium, it's like a calm, relaxed, non-stressful kind of mental and physical state, which for me is a lot more conducive to being like rock hard and relaxed and present.
It's a state of relaxation at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, the erection is literally a relaxation response, and most people don't realize that. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of you, especially if you're, and this is a litmus test I like to use for are my testosterone levels like optimized, is do you wake up in the morning with an erection?
Right.
It's a relaxation response, so your body should be relaxed, and able to create that blood flow. But two, if your testosterone levels are optimized, then you should be waking up with a boner. And if you're not waking up with a boner, that can be an early warning sign that, okay, maybe like on a day-to-day basis, okay, maybe like whatever I ate or did yesterday, it wasn't quite on point. So I can correct today. I can maybe get better sleep, or I can maybe get more sunshine, or maybe you can eat a little bit better today, or hit the gym today, lift some heavier weights. And then tomorrow morning, if you wake up with a raging hard on again, you're like, all right, we're back on track. So I always like to use that as like a daily kind of litmus test to see where I'm at. And because one of the things I also used to take before a scene was my what I called my boner shake. And it's actually, I called it my boner shake, but it's not actually a boner shake. It's actually more of a testosterone shake, if I'm being honest. Because it was basically just like 4 raw eggs and a scoop of vanilla protein powder. And then I just shake that up and slam that a couple of hours before bed. And the rationale behind that is it's similar with vitamin D, by the way. Cholesterol is one of the core building blocks, like literal chemical building blocks of testosterone, right? And so I always made sure that my body, because when I'm asleep, in the early hours in the morning, that's when my body is taking the nutrients I've given it, and it's producing testosterone. So if I eat something which is high in cholesterol, good cholesterol, right? Like, pasture-raised eggs is what I always recommend to people. I take that before I go to sleep. While I'm asleep, my body has all the components it needs to start producing plenty of testosterone. And if I guarantee anyone else, if you slam like the 4 raw eggs 2 hours before you go to bed, you'll wake up the next morning with a boner. You should, if everything is working fine, you should wake up with a raging boner the next morning. That's when like, okay, great, we're prepped and we're ready to go for the next day.
It's a great point, because we've got a saying in the UK, which is you can't put lipstick on a pig, right? And so what I mean by that is that if you're not giving the body the nutrients or the building blocks it needs to make hormones or produce them, then you can't be surprised when you don't feel the way that you do. So are you nourishing and giving your body what it needs in order to make those things?
Yeah. Moving on to, I want to go back to your experiences with working in kind of like this TRT clinic, and like you said, you got into testosterone replacement therapy yourself, and you found that it wasn't quite what you needed. It was helpful, but it wasn't exactly what you needed, right? What do you think about TRT in general, and what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that guys make when it comes to testosterone replacement therapy?
Great question. So I think when I took testosterone, I did it with the right intentions, because I didn't think there was anything else that I knew, but that I could do. But like I said, if I knew what I knew now, I probably wouldn't have gone on it. I don't regret it, because it improved my life and it took me on the trajectory that I am on now. But like most people, they don't want to be on a lifelong medication. And the problem is that when they look at testosterone, they see it as like this poster child for like virility, drive, dominance, power, strength, all of these things, and testosterone kind of encompasses all of those things, right? So when a man says that I want to boost my testosterone, what he's really saying is he wants all of those things, right? And so when you look at it, testosterone is that. But the problem is that they think that taking testosterone is like a plug and play thing, and that I'll automatically feel great. But the issue is that when you take it, it has to be managed by a doctor. You have to get regular blood tests, and you have to inject yourself or take a cream for the rest of your life, right? So it's not something that you just trifle around with and you play with. And guys go on it and they don't think about it, and then they're like, oh, I'm stuck now. I've got to manage this. So if you're going to make the decision to do it under the right circumstances. And as I alluded to earlier on, most men, the majority of men, would do well to avoid it and and fix and clean up their lifestyle as opposed to doing that. Because I've met a lot of guys who've taken testosterone and they still don't feel better. Admittedly, a lot of men do feel better on it, but some men don't feel good on it, and that's because they haven't fixed the underlying reasons why they don't feel very good in the first place, right? And so testosterone will just be a band-aid in that instance. So if your diet's still bad, you've still got a lot of body fat and all of these things, testosterone isn't going to make that any better, right? And so I would say that's the first thing. But there are some men that it can really help, and it's changed a lot of men's lives. So if you are going to do it and you do it properly, you need to do it under the right circumstances and under the guidance of a professional doctor who knows what he's doing. Now, the problem is that, for example, a lot of clinics especially in the United States, that sometimes they can be, for want of a better term, they're a bit predatory, right? So they see guys and they've got a low testosterone. I've met so many guys that have gone to a clinic and they've been given like this, and this, and this, and this, like they've got like a whole laundry list of things that they need to take. When in reality, what their doctor should be advising them on, if they're a good doctor, is like how to take one thing, see how your body reacts, see how you feel, then maybe something else if you need it, as opposed to taking a laundry list of things just so I can get you on a subscription every month and you're paying a couple of grand every month for all these things that you don't need, right? So the first thing is to make sure that you're doing it properly and with the right intention. Do you understand everything that it entails? Do you know like that it's a lifelong medication? And then second is like, if you are going to do it, then you should do it under the guidance of someone who really knows what they're doing. And in my experience, there's not that many who actually know. That there's a lot of people who, like a lot of doctors, people in the medical industry, who they do it by textbook. Those textbooks were written in the 60s and 70s, and they're not based on experience of knowing how to do them. So I know a handful of doctors who are really, really good and that really know their stuff when it comes to hormone optimization. But a lot of people assume just because they've got MD by their name that they know, but you'd be surprised that most actually don't. So do it under the right circumstances and get the right guidance. But most of all, like, what stuff are you avoiding to fixing in your lifestyle that you could otherwise do with testosterone? And now, I'm not here to say that absolutely everyone should avoid it. And I think for certain men, it can make the right sense, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't.
Can you touch on, you mentioned, you used this phrase, like it's a lifelong medication. I think a lot of guys don't understand that, like that consequence of starting TRT. Can you maybe elaborate on that and explain exactly like why it is now, if you start taking it, it's a lifelong medication? Can you maybe explain that to guys who don't understand that?
Absolutely. So I think some people have the impression that if you take testosterone, what it does is it boosts your natural production for a time and then you can come off it and go back. But that's not how it works. So from a scientific standpoint, what it does is when you take exogenous testosterone, or testosterone that's outside of the body, what that does is it shuts down your own natural production. You stop producing testosterone. And your body detects that you've introduced testosterone, and therefore it stops its own natural production, right? So for the duration that you're on exogenous testosterone or pharmaceutical testosterone, let's say, you're not producing your own naturally. So you're not topping up your testosterone stores, you're using exogenous testosterone, and now you're dependent and relying on it. So if you come off it, you will go back to what your levels were before that. And so it's not like you're going to have this boost and it's going to stay there. You just go back to what you were. And in many cases, if you go back to what you were, it might even be worse, because what's happened is that if you've shut down your own natural production for such a long time, that it might actually not come back to what it was. It might not come back altogether. You run that risk. And this is what happens with guys who take anabolic steroids, is that they take steroids for so long that their own natural production is shut down, right? So if it's something that you experiment with and you're going to do a cycle with, that's a bodybuilding mentality. That's not like an actual ancillary medication that's supposed to improve your quality of life and your health. Are two different things. So you don't cycle testosterone. If you're going to go on it, you go on it with the intention of like going on it for life. Now, that's not to say that, I'm sure some doctors will say that, and when I worked at TRT clinics, this is what they said, is that you try it for a time and see how you go, but you're not going to try it for like a couple of weeks. You have to give it time to work and understand that it might take some changing of your dosage and like working with your doctor under the supervision of the doctor to get the dosage right. So it's not just a case of you take it and then you see what it's like. You might have to get it dialed in, because managing testosterone and managing a hormone that's not introduced from outside of your body is quite a complex thing. You have to balance all of these checks and balances that the body does by itself automatically, and now you're doing something that's interfering with that process. So if you're going to do it, you have to understand that it takes some time to adjust. And if you are going to do it, I say lifelong, because you're taking it, shutting down your body's own natural production. So you want to avoid like the yo-yo effect of going on it, coming off it, going on it, coming off it, and you just like your life is more of a roller coaster, and it's worse than before you went on it.
Yep. What are your thoughts on like testosterone boosting supplements? Because I know I have I probably have a similar perspective on like boner pills that you have, like, or like those, what you see at the service station, the gas station boner pills that you see behind the counter, like those little ones that you buy with, like, it's like one pill and it's like Gorilla Max or something, some stupid name like that. I probably have a very similar perspective on those supplements that you have on like the generic testosterone boosters you can probably get on like Amazon or at like a fitness supplement store. What's your honest opinion on most testosterone, like natural testosterone boosters?
So I think that when certain supplements are thought about and like put together in like a really unique way, like maybe in the way that you're going to do it or the way that you're doing it, is like it can be really cool and like can actually be, it can make a big difference. So things like zinc and vitamin D, they obviously work and they can help towards your hormonal balance and your like the balance of your overall body. But the ingredients that are contained in most testosterone boosters, I've done a lot of research on this, they don't actually do anything to boost your overall testosterone. So to give you some examples, so a very common one is Tonkat Ali. So Tonkat Ali, I forget the exact name it has, but I think it's called, there's another name for it, but I forget. So Tonkat Ali there's no scientific evidence to demonstrate that it boosts testosterone in men. Now, it might help with your libido. It might actually help you feel like you've got more of a libido, but it doesn't actually increase your testosterone production. So the two things are a little bit different. And so Tonkat Ali there's no scientific evidence to demonstrate that it actually boosts it. So a lot of testosterone boosters have Tonkat Ali in it, but they claim that it boosts testosterone, but it doesn't. And so another one is D-aspartic acid. That's a common one that you have in testosterone boosters. Again, no evidence, and I think I read a study on rodents, and it actually lowered their hormonal production when they took it. But it's actually a common ingredient in testosterone boosters. Another one is Tribulus terrestris, and again, no scientific evidence whatsoever to demonstrate they boost testosterone. And then there's another one, which is a very common one, which is ZMA, zinc magnesium aspartate. So zinc and magnesium by themselves are actually very good supplements, but it's not that having zinc and magnesium together is like a special combination does something magical. It doesn't, right? We've spoken about zinc and how it helps, but these 4 ones that I've listed off are very, very common. And in fact, you'll probably find a combination of them in most testosterone boosters. And most testosterone boosters don't do what they say. And what they're trying to do is like they're trying to prey on people's needs for instant gratification and men's desire to like take that quick pill, that magic fix that's going to boost their testosterone. And you know what, guys, you may feel something different on it. You may feel some benefits on it of taking it, and that may be the case. It may be a placebo, it might not be. But if you're looking for like an actual definitive, long-term, sustainable increase in your testosterone, that's not what it does.
There's that idea of like the magic pill is very common. Like the guys looking for that easy, simple, quick fix to whatever their problems are. And I think having that the hard thing is like the thing that's going to, like you said before, that's going to actually produce the most results, move the needle the most, right? Is kind of like the simple thing that you should be doing, but it's actually like it's actually more. It's harder than taking a little pill, like getting good hours of sleep, like getting good sleep, not looking at your goddamn phone for like an hour or 2 before you go to bed. Like that requires a lot more like conscious, deliberate effort than putting a pill in your mouth. But it's everybody knows that that's what they should, like, you all know you should be doing that. Everyone knows that you shouldn't be just staring at your phone all day. And we know that our grandparents and our parents weren't doing that when they were, our age, and lo and behold, their T levels are a lot higher. Like a lot of this stuff is kind of self-explanatory. And I think a good rule of thumb is if you think something is a magic pill, then it's probably not. Like if you're reaching for a magic pill, then that tells me that you don't want to put the work in to actually fix the problem.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with that approach. I mean, it's basic human nature to want to. It's like electricity flows like the least form of resistance, and it's basically human nature to want to choose the easy option. But as we know, especially as men, the easy option is not the one that we need, right? And it's not the one that's going to move the needle the most. And as Stirling said, you probably already know there's a bunch of stuff that you're avoiding doing, but you'd rather drop a few $100s on a testosterone booster that's not going to do anything for you.
Daniel, where can everybody find you? What's the best like your social medias? Where can they go for you for some more consulting if they want to get any like one-on-one time with you to personally coach them through optimizing their testosterone levels? What are the best places that guys can find you?
Sure. So I'm most active on Twitter more often than not, and so my handle is @DanielKelly150. I'm also on Instagram. My handle on Instagram is @DanielOptimized, optimized with a Z. And then you can also reach me on my website, and that's if you want to reach out for more information, danielkelly.health.
danielkelly.health. All right, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you guys
Thank you,
all got
Thanks for having me.
a ton of information, a ton of value out of this. Like I said, Daniel's a personal friend of mine. Whenever we sit down and just have random conversations about this stuff, it's always super insightful for both of us. I love it. So you guys got to experience a bit of this yourself through the magic of YouTube. So thank you once again
for joining,
coming
guys.
on.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next time.